So those we went into this week. So on the study guide, I asked for you to look at the topics that are here on the study guide, and if there are any elements that you want me to discuss, spend a little time so that you can enrich your notes, then I would be glad to do that. So let's look first at the list for the general prologue and the wife of Bath. A lot of these things I touched on. Maybe I didn't go into a lot of detail about when we went over the wife of Bath on Tuesday. So if there's anything on the list, just go ahead and put in the chat the number that you want me to talk about with the wife of Bath or the general prologue, and I'll do a little spiel about that so that you can capture it in your notes. Number 7. Okay. So the irony that the wife uses in the tale. So it's ironic that the way that it's about the power shift, right? It's ironic that the knight who thinks that he has the power to rape a maiden and, just sort of take what he wants, ends up having to be the one who is taken advantage of in the end of the story. So there's a situational irony there with how the tables turn on him. How does that use of irony contribute to her characterization? By her, they mean the wife of Bath. And I think that it contributes to our understanding of her as an advocate for women gaining the power in their relationships. She goes to great lengths in the prologue talking about how she tried to manipulate herself into a position where she had power over the men in her life. And so I think that in a way, the old woman in the tale is similar to her, because the old woman attempts to teach the knight a lesson about nobility, but also about power and how you need to use power responsibly, because it's not fun when it's used irresponsibly against you, or, like in a punishing way. So I think it adds to her characterization and her stance that a woman needs to feel powerful in her relationship, and that there are certain manipulations that a woman can use to get that done. It's a good one. What other ones it's separated into the prologue and the tale, but let's focus on general prologue or wife of Bath, and then I'll open it up to the questions on the partner. Number 9. Does the wife's tale contradict anything she says in her prologue? Yes, in some ways. That's been pointed out that the punishment of the knight in the wife of Bath's tale is not very strict of a punishment. So he not only breaks the rules of chivalry, but also there's just basic morality of not raping people that he breaks, and his only punishment really is that he has to go around for a year thinking that he's got to solve this puzzle of what do women want most, and sort of the anguish of not knowing the answer to that question. He also suffers a little bit somewhat when he is forced to marry the old woman, but at the end of the tale, she acquiesces and she says, well, I'll be beautiful and also I'll be faithful, because he gave the power over to her. So the power part of it is in line with what she said, but the punishment part, he almost gets rewarded with a faithful, beautiful wife for raping a maiden. And so there's a little disconnect there if you're going to say that the wife of Bath is, trying to gain control. She does gain control, but then she gives him a benefit. And she doesn't really talk about the benefits that she wants to give her husbands in her prologue. So in that way, there's a disconnect between what she says in her prologue and what happens in her tale. Any others? Okay, well, if you think of one, we can come back to it. There are some questions then for the partner. So have a look at those. Are there any that you want me to discuss from the prologue or the tale of the partner? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to click on this link here because we didn't spend a lot of time yesterday talking about the 7 deadly sins, even though it was mentioned. I put it in the PowerPoint, but I didn't go into detail about that. And the idea is that the partner is trying to play on as many sins as possible. If he can make as many people as possible feel guilty, then he can gain more money. So the sins, I think I have a list of them here. Actually, I have them on this slide right here because somebody came up with the interesting idea that all of the deadly sins are wrapped up in the SpongeBob SquarePants characters. I haven't watched enough SpongeBob, to be honest with you, to know if that's true, but I'm sure you guys can determine that. But the 7 deadly sins are lust, wrath, sloth, pride, greed, envy, and gluttony. And the point that the partner makes is that all of those are really wrapped up in greed. They all come down to that greedy quality. And so the idea is that he preaches to greed because then all the others will be brought in. You can be greedy because you overindulge, you take more. Gluttony, by the way, is not just about food. I know that we think of it that way, but gluttony in the sense of the 7 deadly sins is about taking more than you need in anything, right? So taking more time than you need, taking more love than you need, taking more, um, obviously, food, but just, sort of taking more than your share of something and not leaving enough for other people. But all of these are about, some sort of greediness. And greed is a sin, but, it's sort of um, at the root of all of these. I know they say sloth. I know they say sloth here for Patrick. I don't really know about that character. I know he's a starfish and kind of goofy, but when we're talking about the Middle Ages, sloth is about religious delinquency. I know that we tend to think of sloth as just being lazy or slovenly, like unclean, messy, but for the Middle Ages, sloth means not paying attention to your religious duties. So if your religion says that you're supposed to go to church every Sunday and you don't, that is the deadly sin of sloth. Yeah. I want to point out that there have been other people who came up with deadly sins. I particularly, personally, this is a presentation I sometimes do on 7 deadly sins. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but I really like Gandhi's. I think that it's more modern and suits us a little bit more in this time period, and it's about having things without the supporting elements. In other words, wealth without work. Earning money in a way that doesn't involve your own toil. Pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, business without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, politics without principle. I think that that list speaks a little more solidly to our time period. It's not going to be on your test, and it doesn't affect the Middle Ages, but it's part of this presentation. I just thought I'd mention that Gandhi presented those to the world. All right, I don't see anything in the chat for the partners, prologue, and tale. So let's look at the ones that are about Canterbury in general. And also the terminology. So are there any elements there? I don't think we talked much about Chaucer's retraction. I think I mentioned it it's down here in the terminology. So if you want to, in your notes, you might make a note about that. Whenever you see a terminology list like that, either here or you can also see them in the course content because they put them in this background material. They put them here after each one of the readings. These are some of the topics that will show up on the midterm for the short answers. So the short answers, they ask you on the midterm to define it, connect it to a piece of literature, and explain its significance to that piece of literature. So I wanna emphasize that Chaucer did write a retraction. It's in your textbook, and it's just a paragraph where he says, if this offends anybody, I take it back. I take back all of my stories that were negative and, sort of overtly sinful. And most people think that he just did that to avoid being punished by the church. But I don't see anything in the chat for the Canterbury Tales in general or the terminology. So is that it for the study guide? Go back through and look and see if there's anything else. I will provide you a study guide before the midterm, but I'm not going to be going back over all of this stuff from that time. I'm not going to do a whole lesson review. There's not a day set aside for that. So okay, I don't see anybody else. There is an image here. One of the things that I think it's here at the end, number 9 here, explain the visual depiction of the tale. So this is a visual, sort of visual allegory or metaphor for the partner's tale. And I think that it's kind of interesting to look at to sum up that tale from yesterday. And you can see here that it depicts the 3 youths as they are picking from a tree. And I guess these little things on the bottom are meant to represent the treasure. But the tree is rooted with death at the end of it. So it kind of goes back to that whole Latin phrase that the partner brings up in his prologue, that money is the root of all evil, but so is death in that tale. And death is the consequence that they have for pursuing their greed. I just feel like that was an interesting visual to represent with the tale. Okay, well, I want to talk about discussion 2. I want to talk about what you need to prepare for Tuesday, and then that's pretty much it for today. Oh, I forgot to say, I'm inside the Canterbury Cathedral today. This is the interior part of the cathedral, just in case you were wondering. I wish I could really travel to these places and lecture from these locations. That would be pretty cool. Discussion number 2 is due today. It's right here. So there are several sections to this question, and I do think that it's more effective that you, and instructions do call for you to separate out the different responses to the different sections of the question. So you can do that. Some people numbered them. Some people just made like separate paragraphs when they submitted. That's fine. But there are essentially 3 general parts to the discussion for today. The first one is Chaucer a feminist, and is The Wife of Bath a feminist story? There is some information on feminism here in case you want to jive your determination about that. That's an opinion question with, a standard definition of feminism, not just, social media's definition of feminism. And then also about comedy and satire. How does Chaucer use comedy specifically satire, to call attention to some of the deficiencies in human beings and certain groups. So then you would talk about which groups those are. And then there's a third part to that right here, because they ask you to extend that into the partner, specifically with religious attitudes. I spent a long time yesterday talking about Chaucer and his depiction of the partner and his criticism of the church. So I'm sure you could get some ideas also from that lecture. Then again, make sure that by Monday you have posted onto your classmates' posts. There is maybe I should link it on the discussions. I think I will go back and link it on the discussions. Yesterday I was talking about the rubric that I took that website and turned it into a scoring rubric. So I'll put a link to this right on the discussion so that it's handy. When we finish with our lesson today and sign off, I'll go and do that. Just because I wanted to highlight the difference between the top scoring responses and posts and good. So there were people who made hundreds, there are people who made 95s, and there are people who made 85s and 88s and 90s. And so I kind of wanted to just extend for you what people were doing above and beyond the good level. So you can use this as a tool in your response that you're preparing for today. Do you want me to talk about that at all, or is it pretty self-explanatory? Okay, well, I'm going to assume that that is self-explanatory. All right, that one's due today. Any questions about the discussion? All right, for Tuesday, next week is February already. For Monday, the responses are due for discussion number 2, and then you need to prepare for the beginning of the 16th and 17th century, the Renaissance. Note that we do not have a discussion next week because the reading is heavy for this week right here. There are a number of poems and there's a lot of background material that you need to get through. So our next discussion isn't until next Friday. So on Tuesday, you should have read all of these elements, the introduction to the 16th century and 3 poems, and they're here in the 16th century unit under the readings. So here are the pages for the background information for the 16th century. I'll do kind of a wrap up of that and an overview to hit the main points on Tuesday, but familiarize yourself with that material. And then there are 3 poems, so you should do fairly decent analysis of Sonnet 75, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, and the Nymph's Reply to the Shepherd. These 2 are related, the Marlowe and the Raleigh poems. The page numbers are here for the PDF. So I'll be talking about these 3 poems and also the background material for the 16th century on Tuesday. For Thursday next week, there are a number of sonnets that you need to prepare, and they're listed here. And then the week after that, we'll be going into Othello. So there is a study guide already for the 16th century poetry, and we'll touch on that next Thursday. All right. Any questions? That was kind of a quick class period, so I want to make sure we're covered with everything before we move on next week. All right, well, I hope that you all go out there and have a good day and a good weekend. And I'm looking forward to seeing your responses to discussion number 2, and I'll touch base with you on Tuesday, okay? All right, have a good day.